All across the Upper Peninsula, many of the towns and cities eat, sleep, and breathe high school sports. It's the main topic of conversation when old men get together for coffee every day, or when you pass by your neighbor at the grocery store. And whether it's bragging rights or just a sense of pride, these sports are a big deal to Yoopers all over. So with the boys and girls basketball season just getting started, I decided to sit down with my friend, Bryce Derouin. Bryce is a sports journalist who has been covering sports in the UP since 2014. But he's also a born and raised Yooper, so he's been involved a lot longer than that. Now, I met Bryce for the first time this summer, and really, truth be told, I've been a fan of his sports writing and Twitter musings for the last year or two. I'm a big sports fan myself, so when we did meet, it didn't take long over a beer or two for he and I to find some common ground. I actually had just started this podcast, and through talking about that, he let me in on a secret project he was working on. And he told me this project would change high school sports coverage in the UP as we know it. But you know what? I'll let him tell you about it himself. So without further ado, let's chat it up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 13 of the Chat It Up podcast. Sitting here with my good friend Bryce. Bryce, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I appreciate you being here with me today. Before we get started, I do want to give a big shout out to Ampersand. And if you don't know what Ampersand is, it is the co-working space here in Marquette, Michigan, for the Marquette Chamber of Commerce. It is a space right downtown on Washington Street, and it's a co-working space. There is a kitchenette, there are offices, there are boardrooms, there are cubicles. So if you have a space that you need to work, maybe you work from home, maybe you just have a project that you want to get together with some people, contact Ampersand here in Marquette. Ask for Nick, tell him that Scott sent you, and he will definitely hook you up. But so we are in their specific podcast room today, which is kind of cool. They allowed us to use this today. So let's just jump right into this, Bryce. So I know a little bit about your past a little bit. I know that you graduated from Bark River High School. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Okay. So now, did you grow up in Bark River?
Yeah, I grew up, born and raised in Bark River.
Okay.
So I'm used to the UP and everything.
Perfect. Okay. And we're going to talk a lot about sports today, which is something near and dear to my heart, and I know that's near and dear to your heart too. Did you play a lot of sports and stuff growing up? I mean, I know Bark River is a very small area, but was that a big part of growing up for you, was being involved in sports?
Yeah, it was basketball, football, and golf primarily for me. I remember playing against your dad when he was coaching at North Dickinson.
Shout out to the Nordics.
Yeah, they beat us twice my junior, senior year. So.
Yeah, so, and I love that small town life. I grew up in Kingsford, but every summer, as soon as football season rolled around, that was basically my babysitter, was my dad taking me to practices. Now, North Dickinson didn't do two-a-days because a lot of the kids on their team worked and had jobs, so they would practice once a day in the afternoons because it's usually a little bit cooler. It's not as hot, that type of thing. But yeah, that's a big chunk of my childhood, was like that part of summer, August on. Football practice was my babysitter, essentially. After high school, I know you headed to Grand Valley, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, you got a degree in journalism. Was that the plan from day one when you headed there? Was that something that you always were kind of like leaning towards?
Yeah, so the inspiration for being a sports journalist came when I was in 6th or 7th grade. I was watching the NCAA tournament on TV. I saw the line of press row sitting courtside covering the games, and I thought, wow, it's a cool job.
Sure.
So that's kind of the inspiration. As I got older, I thought lawyer or sports writer. So kind of decided to go to journalism, and I decided on Grand Valley because that's where my sister went. So
Okay.
moving her in and everything, I just fell in love with the campus. And a lot of kids from Bark River went to Grand Valley.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. It seems like there's little pockets of that at a lot of downstate schools. I know there were a lot of kids from the Iron Mountain Kingsford area when I went to Central. There were a lot of us kind of in that pocket there. I know there was another big pocket of kids that were at Saginaw Valley too. So that's interesting. But so to fast forward a little bit, I don't want to like completely just breeze through the college experience that you had, but I know you ended up in back in Escanaba in around like 2014-ish?
Yeah, 2014, right after graduation.
Okay, so before you got there, were you active like with the school newspaper at Grand Valley? Were you doing some sports writing for them?
Yeah, so my sophomore year, I started working at their sports paper.
Okay.
First beat I had was the swimming beat, which is ironic because I can't swim. So I used my knowledge of Michael Phelps being at the Olympics all the time.
Sure.
Eventually, I worked to the women's basketball beat and then became the sports editor, so I covered men's basketball and primarily football as well.
Okay, interesting. So when you headed up to Escanaba to work with the Daily Press, did they have you kind of on that similar beat, or did that kind of look different?
It was different because it was the first time I covered preps, and then
Okay.
there's the familiarity with being in the area that you played against certain coaches, certain teams, so that
Sure.
was interesting. So in a way it helped because I had those connections and knew everyone.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I was thinking of that. You know, you're basically pretty much moving right to your own backyard where you're from. So that's an interesting dynamic where you're probably covering a lot of coaches and players that you yourself had worked with or were familiar with. You know, you weren't that far removed from that level. So that's an interesting take. Did you find that made the job easier, or did in some respects did it make it harder covering that then because you kind of knew these people?
I think it made it easier because there's that stigma with sports writers that they don't know the game because they haven't played it. So immediately I had some respect from just the coaches because they understood that I played at Bark River, so they understood my history there. And I think that helped just with credibility, the questions and conversations we were able to have. I feel like they were able to open up more to me because they feel like they could relate with me in a way.
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting take too, because now that I think of like the people that I knew as sports writers growing up, or sports writers that you think of that are like famous, you know, the Skip Baylesses of the world or those type of people, you don't really look at them as like being athletes prior, because a lot of them probably haven't played the game. But you know, you are one of those sports writers that can walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So you ended up heading up to Houghton in about 2015, correct?
Yeah.
So how did that come about, that transition?
So it's kind of ironic. A week or two before the sports editor job opened up in Houghton, I was saying, like, why would anyone want to live there? It snows so much.
It snows so
cold.
much. Yeah.
And I'm a basketball guy. I'm like, they don't even like basketball as much up there, so why would you want to live there? And then the sports editor job opened up for the Daily Mining Gazette in Houghton. I got asked if I'd be interested in applying. The thing that stuck out was that I could cover Michigan Tech, get back into the GLIAC, cover the football beat, the basketball beat, so that interested me. Because at this point, the goal was for me to be, like, I want to be a Division I beat writer or pro team eventually down the line. So I figured this would be a good step in my career to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess then, once you got up there, was it everything that you expected it would be, or I guess a better question to that would be, once you got up there and you got into the thick of it and following the Michigan Tech and kind of going through the GLIAC, did you find yourself leaning more towards the college beat than the prep beat, or?
I feel like it'd be split more because whatever I was doing, I had fun with it at the time, because Tech would usually be Thursdays, Saturdays for basketball, football games on Saturdays, and you do the preview stuff during the week, meet with the coaches, players. It was really nice meeting with those coaches and just picking their brains. I mean, they're really smart, educated with the game, and some of the smartest people I've talked to about it, so I really enjoyed that experience. The preps were different because I go from an area where people know me to an area where they're like, who's this guy? Like,
Sure.
So some of them I had some connections to because it was kind of ironic. The Ewan Trail Creek coach, Brad Bezanin,
Yep.
his first year coaching, they went 23-0, and that was my junior year. But then we beat them in this regional finals.
Oh.
So he remembered that. So we had a good laugh.
I'm sure he did.
We had a good laugh about that a few times. So
definitely. Yeah, that's an interesting kind of back and forth there between collegiate and then perhaps especially with, there's a lot of small schools over there, whether it be, you're in Chassell or you're in Calumet or Hancock or you're right in Houghton or down in Ewan Trout Creek. I mean, when people picture the Keweenaw, you really kind of just picture, like the top of the UP. But, I mean, if you really kind of stretch it, there's some major mileage there that you've got to kind of cover. So I'm sure that made for some, interesting stuff, especially with weather and that sort of stuff. But that's some major ground to cover. I mean, did you find that was difficult? Or was it not too bad to handle?
It was manageable. I mean, I have a Chrysler 300, but it only has rear-wheel drive, so it kind of made it squirrely trying to drive up there at times.
Sure.
One kind of ironic, funny story is the night before I covered a Houghton boys game, put this kid, had a really great game, put him on the front page as the main photo.
Yeah.
Next day I cover a girls game, and then I get stuck, and I end up backing into that kid.
Oh.
So it was kind of funny, but it all worked out. But yeah, there's been some times where you can't even see, where it's just white. And
right. You're just driving in a whiteout.
Yeah.
So from there, essentially, so that was 2015, pretty much all the way up to pretty much this summer. You were up in Houghton, and eventually you've kind of, now you've made your way to Marquette. I guess what led to transitioning from there to Marquette?
So there's kind of a bunch of things that happened
Sure.
from that. One, with Houghton, it was a lot, just those 3 years. I didn't understand how much the sports editor has to do up there.
Sure.
Newspapers in the UP aren't exactly bustling financially, so
yes.
Sports editor has to do a lot of jobs. It's editing people's story, taking photos, editing photos, designing the pages,
Sure.
taking all the roundups from the games that you don't cover, put those together.
Yep.
And then you have to design the NFL sections and then the outdoors. So I'd be pulling like 60, 70 hours a week, but only getting paid really for 40.
Sure.
But just because you care about the product, so you put that much time and effort
absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought all that stuff up, because I think that there's probably a lot of people out there that think, oh, being a sports writer is probably a pretty cushy job, or a sports editor. You're just, dealing with sports all day. But all the stuff that you just rattle off, the design, you've got to get scores, you've got to, you've got to make it right, you've got to proofread, you've got to edit, you've got to get the photos in there. I mean, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that's not sexy, for a lack of a better word. It's just you got to grind it out, really, right?
Yeah, there's typically in the winter I work every night, 7 days a week, and then I'd start, if I had a game to cover, at 6 p.m., go to the game, and there's times in the office I'd leave at 3, 4 a.m.
Yeah.
If we had a special section I had to make, I'd leave at 7 a.m.
Yeah. Well, especially, like you said, in the winter, because, with the big change to boys and girls basketball being in the same season, I don't know if you like that or you don't like that. What's your take on that?
I grew up all the time with girls in the fall, basketball, boys in the winter, so it was like basketball all year round, which I loved. And
right.
with the project now, which we'll talk more about later, I would love it if it was that way too, so we could cover basketball all year round. But
right.
Yeah, I miss those. When I was in high school, I loved it because we could go to play our games and then go watch the girls. It was fun, but just from a working perspective, you wish it was split.
Yeah, I feel the same as you do. I'm very much a purist, and I grew up with the exact same thing, having the girls' basketball season be in the fall. I mean, I understand some of the reasons why they made this switch as far as, like, recruiting. I know that was a big thing for college coaches, being able to recruit, and a few other reasons. But, yeah, I much more preferred it when it was separate seasons, because, really I feel bad. Who I feel bad for is, like, parents. I mean, how do you be everywhere at once? And, the other thing, too, is, like, I would be curious to know what attendance at these games looks like now with the switch. because there's only so much basketball you can watch. I would think it would almost probably hurt attendance because you have so many games per week that it's got to just be like less attended. But, you know, like I said, I'd be curious what the numbers say. I think that's what it would be, but I could be wrong.
It has to because, well, for Bark River, they do it one way where boys and girls will switch. So boys will play Mondays, Thursdays in the first half, girls Tuesday, Fridays. Midway through, they'll switch. But there's like Eski and Nagani where their boys and girls will play both Tuesday night at the same time in different locations.
Oh, wow.
So
okay, yeah. So then if you have that, then you're for sure going to see a drop.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, that's kind of part of sports in the UP. You know, it seems like everybody's football numbers are way down. I mean, I think Kingsford only had like 30-some kids on their team this year, which, you know, me growing up in Kingsford and football being like the end-all, be-all, you know, to see only like 30 kids, you know, on the roster is kind of like makes you raise your eyebrows. But that goes back to, you know, now more kids are playing soccer too. There's a lot more options out there for kids to do things, I guess. But I don't know. Do you see a lot of that too? I mean, I would think you would see the same thing that I'm seeing, right? Numbers dropping.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one division. Well, Class D is now called Division 4. There's only one Division 4 football team, the UP, Lakeland and Hubble. So you just look at it from that perspective. I was one of the last years when we had a full Class D schedule. In 2010, we could play all the East End teams, like the Brimleys, the Cedarvilles. They had 11-person programs, and now those are all gone. Yeah,
everybody's going to 8-man, or they don't have programs, or they're co-oping and that type of thing, you know. So the landscape of sports in the UP has certainly changed a lot just from when you and I were in school, which isn't really all that long ago. A little longer for me, but I don't want to date myself too much. So you moved to Marquette, which is a big move for you, and as part of that, I know you said there were a lot of things that led to that transition here to Marquette, but one of the things that kind of came out of that was Upbeat Sports. So do you want to talk a little bit about what exactly Upbeat Sports is?
So it's a subscription-based website that's dedicated to covering prep sports, and right now we have 4 writers. There's me, Eden Lassie, who worked with me at the Daily Mining Gazette. She interned at Sports Illustrated, covered professional teams, wrote great features for SI. There's Keith Shelton, who was a sports editor at the Daily Press when I was there. So I was lucky to work with him, build that connection. He's another dedicated writer that would work 60, 70 hours a week just because he loved to put out a great product. There's Jason Sutherland, who's a student at Michigan Tech, who enjoys writing. We looked at his work. He reached out to us to see if he would be an option, and we decided to take him on, and he spent the fall covering football to get ready for basketball season. And so we have 4 writers that are covering the UP to bring you basketball coverage.
Awesome. Now, where did the idea come from? Like, how did this even start? Because it had to start somewhere. Was it like sitting over a beer and talking, or I mean, where did this idea come from?
So that's one of the reasons we moved to Marquette, and just how it kind of came into motion. So the Gazette, I covered Dollar Bay semifinal run and Chassel's state final run, and at that point I felt like I did everything I could, and I was kind of looking for something else. At that time, I got a job offer in Marquette that would allow me to work normal daytime hours, so I'd still be able to cover sports. And right when I was getting that offer, me and Eden were talking about potentially starting our own sports website.
Okay.
And this was during when a certain newspaper in the UP was having coaches being disgruntled about lack of coverage.
Yeah.
They would joke with me like, hey, we'll start a GoFundMe if you come cover our teams. And in one of their posts to vent about their disagreements, they counted my articles that I covered from the past year. Compared to the newspaper, I covered more than the entire staff just by myself.
Wow. Okay, so that's saying a lot for sure. But I like that you and Eden kind of basically said, hey, there's a lot of awesome sports stories going on in the UP. Let's cover them.
Yeah,
you know, that's an awesome idea. And the other thing is nobody else is really doing it. I mean, you said the newspaper yourself, they're on a limited budget, right?
Yeah.
And they can only get so many places at once. And these coaches are like, hey, we don't even have anybody at our game, you know, that type of thing. So I love the thought process behind that. So obviously you don't just kind of like flip a switch and the website's there and all of this is put together. Can you walk me through that process a little bit of how you actually like got this created and got it off the ground?
Yeah, that's another part why just everything worked together too. So besides, like, another thing that pushed us over the edge was Jake Polfus, Kearney NATO coach, texted me one night when we were thinking about it, said, hey, you should start your own sports website like wisconsinsports.net. And I was like, all right, if I get this job in Marquette, we'll heavily consider it. So we did. But the reason why it really works is because I have a friend, Haley McDermott, graduated 2 years below me at Bark River. She's a graphic designer for a design firm in Green Bay.
Okay.
So she handles all the branding and designing for professionally built websites. So she did all our branding, came up with the name Upbeat, the color scheme, logo, everything.
Awesome.
And designed the whole website. We gave her examples of what we wanted, and she put it together and gave us a great deal. She has also a website developer that she works closely with.
Okay.
Those two were able to freelance for us, and it just kind of all came together with all the connections.
Yeah, and it's UP connections too, which is even better. So you're really kind of keeping it in the family, so to speak. So have you had any sort of pushback to the fact that you're creating this site? I mean, I know not everything is like sunshine and rainbows, but you haven't really received any like flack or pushback for creating the site, at least not this far. I mean, I know you're kind of in the early stages, but everything's been good.
Yeah, honestly, everyone's just kind of excited for it. There's been a couple tweets people showed me where high school kids, former high school athletes have tweeted, I wish Upbeat Sports was around when I was in school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm reading these features on you know, when you did the top 25 boys players in the UP, and I'm like, man, where was this when I was in high school? You know, you get like really excited to see stuff like that, and you can see kids getting excited about it too, so that's really cool. It's got a very much a feel to it, and you and I have talked a little bit about this before. It reminds me a little bit of like The Athletic, like that kind of thing, but it's like that crossed with UP Sports, so it's like the best of both worlds because it's, you know, it's not UP Sports is, I think, unique to other places. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Eden, too, who played prep sports in Colorado, she mentions in her column they had one of the best school seasons in school history, and the community didn't care at all.
Right.
So she comes here, see how much everyone's invested, and she believes that really this website project can only work in an area where sports are really passionate and the communities are passionate about their teams like they are in the UP.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many small towns, the Bark Rivers and the Felches of the world and the Chassels and you know you name it, the Cedarvilles and the Brimleys, where, I mean, let's be honest, besides like when the Friday night lights come on or when you turn the gym on a Tuesday or a Thursday, there's not really a whole lot going on, right? You know, as far as like social settings. So, you know, growing up, I always was very keen and aware of that's like your social time. That was like a gathering place for people. You go to a football game, you go to a basketball game, you know, have a bag of popcorn and you hang out and you get to see some people. So it's, you know, it's unlike anything else I've ever experienced. So you definitely have something unique to cover there. Touching back a little bit about, you know, those top 25 players that you kind of went through for the boys basketball season, what teams are you really kind of excited to follow, or what big stories do you think are going to come out of this basketball season?
The main one is the Iron Mountain boys.
Sure.
They returned all 5 starters from the quarterfinal run last year.
Yep.
Marcus Johnson is the Class ABC reigning player of the year.
Yeah.
Foster Wonders, a sophomore, already has Division I offers.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched them yesterday play Gladstone. They live up to the hype, and it's just kind of cool to see them play in person because you hear so many things about them.
Yes.
So to be able to cover them is a unique experience.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting them to watch them play this season. Mostly for me, it's a bit of nostalgia just because, you know, like Bucky and Foster's dad, like, you know, I grew up watching those guys play and like I know them personally, so now to see their kids playing and that type of thing, it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Although it makes me feel old a little bit. But you know, I'm curious to see too. Calumet had a pretty good squad last year too, didn't they?
Yeah, Matt Ojala is set to become the school's all-time leading scorer in the coming games.
Yeah.
He just had 12 assists last night in a win over Nagani. He's one of the best guards in the UP. He's fun to watch.
Very cool. Speaking of Grand Valley, didn't that tall kid from Marquette just sign with Grand Valley?
Yeah, Marius Gerzoulis.
Yeah, that's it. I knew I was going to slaughter his name. So
yeah, 6'10" forward. It's kind of funny because when he announces scholarships on scholarship offers on Twitter,
yeah,
he had Tech, Northern, Grand Valley, and that's where his two brothers played and his sister.
Well, then I guess it's not too far out of reach. Let me see here. What else do I want to talk to you about? So, obviously, you guys are covering super heavy with basketball because we're right in the thick of it. I assume, obviously, you guys are gonna try and get us heavy into like football and that type of stuff too. Or I mean, I know you don't want to give away too much, but what's your plan with that?
You mentioned the pushback or the anything that has happened so far. The one thing is people ask, what else are we doing?
Yes.
So, and I'm like, just wait. You'll see.
Just wait? Okay.
Yeah.
I won't make you give it away then. I don't blame you for that. Now, so you talked a little bit about, it's $5.99 a month, basically. So it's a subscription service, but it's ad-free. But I like that you put out there, basically that's pretty much just covering so you guys can get to the games, because there's travel costs, there's some expenses in there. It's not like you guys are out here making a mint, running this site and doing what you're doing. You guys are doing it because you love UP sports and you know that there's people out there that love it. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, you're going to be doing a podcast, though, too, right?
Yeah, the Upbeat podcast. Jason is producer, editing it all for us. It should be coming out in the coming days. And we want to have it regularly where we just Eden and I will discuss what we see, project certain things, and just have a discussion about UP sports with guests as well.
Sure. Well, and so I know you said you have the one student at Tech. Is Jason still up in Houghton? Is he like kind of covering that area for you? I mean, I know you guys are kind of traveling all over, but is he I'm gonna kind of help cover that part of the UP? Or
yeah, Jason Sutherland is just in the Copper Country covering those schools primarily, and then we make our way up there too. Like Eden's going up to Dollar Bay for the Jeffers game on Thursday.
Sure. Now, I'm assuming, does Eden have a full-time job, too, besides just doing Upbeat? Or is she just handling that, or how does that work?
Yeah, she's down the street at Boomerang
okay.
right now.
Okay, so that's got to kind of make it interesting, too, because you've got to balance a full-time job with running this website. How does that work?
It's not too bad. I gave up a lot of other things for so no more Fortnite, pretty much. I retired that. I turned my gaming setup into a professional desk area now.
Okay.
So yeah, the extracurriculars are kind of dumb, but that's fine. I like seeing this product and doing it and investing time into it. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't feel like a job.
And that's the most important thing, I think, because as soon as it starts feeling like a job or it starts feeling like a hassle, then you got to kind of take a look in the mirror and say, okay, is this like really worth it? Mm-hmm. At least that's how I feel like about doing this podcast, because I've got a full-time job and I'm just kind of doing this because it's something I love and I like to do and I'm passionate about it, but I don't ever want it to feel like it's like work to me, because if it does, then I'm probably going to just sign off and tell everybody like, cool, thanks for listening in. But so I'm trying to think, another question I'd like to pick your brain on, because, being from Kingsford, and I've had, a lot of discussions with some people around Kingsford about this, their basketball program has seen its share of struggles over the years, all the way through from before ever I was even there. Mm-hmm. It just seems to be like, you hate to say it's a football school, but it's just always kind of had that vibe. Do you kind of get that same vibe from it, or what do you think there? I mean, I know they've got two really good players this year that were both in the top 25. Do you see them kind of turning that around, or where do you see that going?
So it's kind of funny because Kingsford, despite whatever struggles they have, they always would beat Houghton whenever I would cover them or see them. So whenever I see them, like, wow, these guys are pretty good, because that's kind of Houghton played 4 times in Class B.
Yep.
They played Kingsford in the first round every time, and they lost. And so and Kingsford has 2 of the guys, Tyler Beauchamp, Luke Terry, in our top 25.
Yeah.
And I think as long as you have guys that can get the ball, get you 15, 20 points a night, you can build around that. So I think they'll be fine this year.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Shout out to Coach Okenen if he ends up listening to this, because Okie and I fun trivia. Before I was doing what I'm doing now, I was a teacher. So when I did my student teaching, I did it at Kingsford, and I actually was an assistant coach for one season for Okenen, and so that was fun. I learned a lot doing that. Basketball is more kind of your main passion as far as sports. Did I hear you say earlier you're kind of more of a basketball guy?
Yeah, compared to hockey.
Well, yeah, I mean this time of year, yeah.
I get asked what my favorite sport to cover is,
Yeah.
and I don't know. It's in the winter, it's basketball, in the football, it's fall. I can't really pick against each other because
Right.
there's just something great about the organization of football and just kind of the poetic violence of it all and everything that
Yeah.
I like.
I get it. I'm a big football guy. I enjoy basketball. This time of year, though, I'm a big Michigan State basketball guy, so that's I'm up to my elbows in that all the way through, and that carries me through the winter because you basically get 2 games a week just about all the way through. So that's my big thing. But it's always interesting to hear, what sports people like and why. Because you said you played golf in the spring, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So my big thing in the spring was I played tennis.
Okay.
Because it was if you were going to play football, you had to have a spring sport. That's just the way it worked at Kingsford, And I was slow as could be. So I'm I'm not going to run track. And I can't run distance. I'm not a distance runner. And I'm not big enough to do shot put. And I can't long jump. I'm all right, I got to figure something else out. And at the time, baseball wasn't a varsity sport. I loved playing baseball. So I ended up finding tennis, which I still actually kind of play off and on every now and then in the summer. So that's kind of a sport you can kind of carry with you.
Mm-hmm.
I do golf. I do love to golf, but I'm rotten at it. So I didn't play that in high school. But I'll be very curious to see where you guys kind of take things, because I know there's a lot of different directions that you could go with this website. But I feel like the sky's the limit for you guys. And it's cool that you and Eden are doing this together. You guys just got engaged, so congratulations on that.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, I would be too. I mean, you moved to Marquette. You guys, you get a great job. You start this website together. Now you guys are getting married. I mean, that's all big stuff. Is there anything else? I'm looking through here, and I don't see anything that I missed that I really wanted to talk to you about. Is there anything else sports-wise or website-wise that you want to talk about? I mean, what's some other big stuff that's going on sports-wise with the UP? I mean, we talked a little bit about Calumet, Iron Mountain. How's Marquette's squad going to be this year?
I think Marquette's probably the second best team in the UP. I saw them in a scrimmage against Gwynn.
Okay.
They actually scrimmaged Iron Mountain last week, and I talked to someone. They said apparently Iron Mountain won that. So the two best teams in the UP right there scrimmage. You won't play each other in the regular season, but that kind of gives you idea that those two are
right. And I love some of you guys did a very good job with your preview before you went to the subscription, those handful of articles, which I think you can actually access them still, even though you're on your subscription side now. But I really enjoyed the piece that you did about Iron Mountain basketball and Bucky, and that was really good. The other one that I really, really liked was the one that you did on Dan Waterman. That was an interesting off-season story. I was wondering if you guys were going to cover that, because there was quite a bit of controversy there, right?
Yeah. So Dan got let go because of sideline antics. They called it. A week later, then they have the school board meeting, and he gets a lot of support, and they reverse their decision and reinstate him. So that was obviously one of the forefront stories we had planned to feature, because our off-season stuff, we didn't want to just go to teams and say, okay, who's good or who graduated, how do you replace them. We wanted to do stories on people, the interesting storylines that people don't typically get in the UP.
Sure.
And it was great because Dan was 100% open, answered all questions, didn't leave anything off the record, and that's what was able to get the story to be as good as it was.
Sure. And I love the part of that too where you're talking about how it affected his son, because that's kind of almost like a got put on the back burner, unfortunately, as all of this unfolded. But it's he's coaching his kid too, so then he's it becomes not just a coach and player situation, but a father and son situation. So I liked that take on the article too, because in the grand scheme of things, that's probably way more important than a basketball game.
Well, that kind of related to me in a way because after I graduated high school, Bark River went through some down years with a bunch of kids who didn't care.
Sure.
Actually forced my dad out. So in a way, I know how that can affect someone to just see their dad let go. And yeah, Jason was fine and answered all those questions as well. So
yeah, and that's. I mean, it's great that he did that, and I guess in a way, my dad was never let go from his job, but I guess I understand it, or I relate to being a coach's son, because it's definitely a unique situation, because you see and hear a lot of things being the child of a coach, so it definitely gives you a unique and interesting perspective, and definitely a different take on just high school sports in general. So, or something else now that I was just going to ask you. Oh, the story that you did on Bill Body. Shout out to Billy.
Shout out to William.
Yeah, to William Allen. So that's a great story too, because Bill is basically making Manistee great again, right?
MMA, I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Make Manistee great again. Yeah, so someone told me he got the job, and I texted Bill. I was like, hey, we want to do this story on you, because he's a young guy who genuinely cares about sports, and he comes from his dad who has coaching experience, so he knows kind of what it's like to relate to kids in the UP, and he's in a unique situation where they haven't had a lot of success, and he's got the energy and commitment to attempt to turn that program around. Yeah,
I think so too, and I just love that he's just jumping right into it, I think a lot of people, young people, would maybe shy away from stepping into like the varsity spotlight right off the bat. A lot of people are like, oh, maybe I'll coach 7th or 8th grade, or maybe freshman, and kind of, get my feet wet a little bit, and then we'll see. But he's just like, no, like, let's do it. I'm going to take this on, hit the ground running. So I'm definitely rooting for him. I'm curious to see how, where he takes that program. So that'll be a lot of fun to follow. One other question I have for you, and you don't have to name any names or places or throw anybody under the bus, but you hear so often, well, at least I hear so often, because my dad has been a basketball official for years, and people ask me all the time, oh, how come you don't get into reffing? You'd probably be good at that. Why don't you ref? And my response usually is, fans are brutal. Yeah. I go to games, I go to a handful of games, not a lot, because I don't have a kid in high school, and I'm passionate about high school sports, but usually only come playoff time is really where I'll go to Negaunee and check out the district games and that type of stuff. You've been around sports long enough in the UP, do you think that fans and parents have really gotten worse over the years? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I don't know if to the degree if they've gotten worse, but I think there's more avenues for them to vent their frustrations with phones, social media. There's one coach who took over a program, and by halftime he had 50 texts on his phone from the parents. They won that game too. So.
Oh wow.
There's another coach where I thought he would have no issues at all, because just his prestige and what he's accomplished. Apparently he has a lot of issues too, I would have never imagined. The only coach that has had virtually no incidents, he said only one, and it wasn't as bad as what other people deal with, is Jake Polfus at Kearney.
Okay.
Because I was like, Jake, you got to be the only person in the UP who has no issues. He's like, I understand. He's like, yeah, I get how fortunate I am here. So only Jake Polfus, I think, is probably the Ingles and St. Ignace probably as well.
Right.
You would think that they probably wouldn't have as much. But
yeah.
I know Jake says how fortunate he is.
Growing up, my dad had very few. I honestly, less than, he coached for 37 years, and I don't even think I could count. I don't even think I could think of more than 1 or 2 instances that he had, and maybe I was shielded from it.
Yeah.
But, my dad actually talked about it when he was inducted into the Michigan High School Football Coaches Association. He said that he was fortunate to have a lack of parent participation, and everybody kind of started laughing. And he said, what I really mean by that is they let coaches coach, and they let players play. Mm-hmm. So I think when you have a community that gets it, like the Kearneys of the world, where they get it and they buy into it, then you have a lot less of those issues. But, I think it can be a detriment. I think that's why they're hurting for officials so bad. If I'm being honest, I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I also think it's the scheduling too, with the boys and the girls in the same season. But obviously, I mean, how much can people take with the vitriol from the crowds night in, night out? Especially, you could do it 4 times a week. You don't want to deal with that
right
often.
Right. Yeah, like you said, 4 nights a week. There's sometimes where my dad refs 5 nights a week. Yeah. And I joke with him now that he says, well, I'm just used to it after all these years, but he's old enough now that he's got hearing aids. I'm like, you probably just turn them off or don't put them in when you go on the court, and then you just can't hear anybody. So he didn't really like when I made that joke with him. But, yeah, it's just interesting. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there, but I hope it changes for the better. But speaking of that, here's a fresh tip for you for a hot story for next season. It will be my father's 50th year reffing high school basketball. Okay. His goal, he's always said, is he wanted to get to 50 years. So this season is number 49. So next season will be 50. So if you want to
lock that one away.
Yeah, lock that one away. If you happen to be covering a game that he's at, maybe you could get a few sound bites out of him or get some stuff about 50 years of reffing basketball. But like I said, I don't think I have any other stuff. We kind of got off on a side tangent there. Is there anything else you want to add about the website or what you guys are doing, or anything else you want to touch on?
No, I just give a shout out to our staff, just how dedicated they are to committing to this thing. We have Eden, who just drove to Cedarville last night, 3 hours away to cover a game, and Keith Shelton, who's also working at a full-time job, willing to work for us, and Jason, who is a student full-time, willing to cover that whole area as well. And I just say how proud that we are of the staff that we have to put this together.
Awesome. Well, I guess there is one final question, which if you've listened to my podcast, you know what the final question is always. Is it ketchup or gravy or other on your pasty?
I eat them plain.
You like them plain?
Yeah.
You just like them plain, Jane?
Also, Eden still has to try a pasty, so we don't know which ones are the best in Marquette, though.
Ooh, that's a highly debated topic right there. Gene K's has very good pasties, so they're right down by the dome. Gene K's, yeah.
You're telling me to send you a check for that.
Yeah. So, not that that's an endorsement, and maybe they could send me a check. You know who else has really good pasties, and I'm actually going to give them a shout out because it's right in my backyard. But you wouldn't think it, but Ralph's Italian Deli up in Ishpeming, because that's right next to my house.
I always want to stop there because I go to up there for work sometimes, and
you need to stop in.
Okay.
They've got them on a spindle thing. They're like $5, but they're very good. But really, if you're stopping in at Ralph's, you need to get some kudigi, which is basically Italian sausage, but it's the best.
All right, I'll stop then.
But that's interesting. She's never had a pasty. How long has she lived in the UP?
She got up here, just over a year. So. Okay,
so it's been over a year. Well, you're gonna have to ask her. We'll add her to my. I have on the Facebook page. I've got a pasty chart for who picks what. So you'll have to let me know what the staff. You let me know what the whole staff picks. And we'll do a separate one for Upbeat Sports, the pasty picks. We'll do a whole separate one, all right?
Sounds good, yeah.
All right, well, thanks again, Bryce, for meeting with me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Okay, it's time for the takeaways from my chat with Bryce. My first one is really not a new takeaway. It's one that I've talked about before, and that's pursuing your passion. Bryce loves sports, and he loves to write about them. Now, what makes his story a little bit different is that making all of this happen in the UP isn't exactly an easy thing to do. But he's been able to do it because he's put the time and the effort in. I'm talking long hours in the office or on the road, in the gyms or at these stadiums. You know, he's making all of this happen. And the best part about all of it is that it actually shows through in his writing. And I know that those of us that love sports and read his stuff really appreciate that. And really, the same could be said for the rest of the Upbeat staff. I hate to use a cliche, but they're doing it all for a love of the game. My next takeaway is to find your own lane.
Bryce and Eden were able to clearly see a wide open lane in UP sports reporting. It was a spot that desperately needed to be filled. And instead of sitting around on that idea, they've picked up the ball and ran with it. And they, along with the rest of the staff at Upbeat, are now blazing a trail. And they're setting a high standard in UP sports news. To me, that's exciting and it's really impressive. And the funny thing is I would bet any money they aren't the first people in the UP to have this idea. But they are the first people to follow through with it on an extremely high level. My last takeaway is really just more of a comment on high school sports in the Upper Peninsula. They truly are special. And the support that we give these student athletes is second to none. I would challenge anyone listening to this, though, to extend that same support to our coaches, officials, and volunteers. I feel very strongly that all of these people deserve the same revere and respect that we extend to the athletes that are out there competing. Because without them, the sports that we all love so much, well, they just might go flat. Chat It Up is a bi-weekly podcast about all things Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and leave me a review. You can also find Chat It Up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you again to the Marquette Chamber of Commerce and the Ampersand Co-working Space for hosting us. And as always, a huge thank you to all of you listening in. I'm your host, Shooter, reminding you to keep your chin up and your eyes forward.